Businesses thrive by knowing customer insights because today's insights are tomorrow's facts. At iResearch, we live and breathe insights. And despite searching high and low, we were unable to find a customer insights podcast that answers one of the most important questions in business. Why do customers do what they do? So we launched one. Hi, I'm your host, Darshan Mehta. On this episode, I'm joined by Arnold Lee. He is an interim CFO with deep experience from hands-on financial and strategic support to over 200 startups and small businesses, as well as medium-sized and large companies in various fields such as technology, cleantech, financial services, consumer products, and food and beverage. He also has significant experience in entrepreneurship, strategic development, corporate finance, marketing, and operations management. Currently, he is the CFO and managing director at CFO Growth Advisors, a CFO firm that provides a broad range of outsourced strategic and operational interim CFO services to startups and businesses of all sizes. He's currently in Silicon Valley and in San Francisco Bay Area. Welcome, Arnold. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You have had an interesting journey throughout your career. And can you please share with us a brief overview of your journey and the aha moments that have brought you from being in your early roles in management consulting to your current position as CFO and managing director of CFO Growth Advisors?
Before going to Stanford Business School, which was an amazing experience, I actually started in marketing. So I like to point that out. I'm not just someone who likes numbers and finance. The coming out of Stanford Business School, I was able to get my feet deeply immersed into strategy consulting with a global firm and working with all sorts of companies in all different industries. And you learn quite a bit there to supplement the great experience you have as an MBA student. You also see a lot of things that aren't in the case studies and textbooks in terms of real business, which is really fascinating. So fast forward a few years, coming back to Silicon Valley, seeing a lot of entrepreneurial things, been involved in entrepreneurial things. Kind of to my surprise, I had peers and classmates from my business school class asking me for advice, strategic and financial, on their own growing companies. It wasn't something I was looking for, and I always wondered, well, don't we have the same backgrounds? Don't we? We were sat in the same classes, and kind of the aha moment was, yes, but everyone has a different set of perspectives and experience as you go through life, and having perhaps objectivity, certain skills, even a sounding board, even for very accomplished CEOs and business leaders, is huge power. In fact, it becomes even more powerful the larger the company that they're running or the more advanced that they become in their careers. I don't know if that made any sense. So that was the spark in my career to say, people actually want this kind of help. They can't always get it on a full-time basis. And so providing outsourced CFO services to entrepreneurs, business owners, CEOs, particularly for small middle market companies, a middle market company, even if they're fast growing, really shouldn't need a full-time CFO until they're well over $50 million in revenues, perhaps even higher. So that's the kind of stumbling into where I am now. And we have a small firm, and we're very focused on providing the best service we can to, again, these CEOs and entrepreneurs. And we find it very emotionally rewarding, in some strange way. So that's my long story to your simple question.
But I'm curious, I want to go back even toward the beginning. You said you got into consulting right away after Stanford Business School, and I'll share with you, I did the same thing, but what sparked my interest to go into consulting is I remember being in college, and I believe Stanford does this too, where I was doing case studies.
Oh, yeah.
And I absolutely love these case studies because, it really was a microcosm of what happens in business. We present with all these facts, figures, and stuff. And like in business, there's a lot of noise, right?
Yep.
And you have to ferret through all that noise to get to the most critical pieces that are really impacting you or that need to be solved. And that just sparked my interest in, And I think like kind of what you were saying, you're not just a numbers guy, you're also marketing, strategic, man. I kind of like all of those things and I like delving
Yeah.
into it. So I'm curious, what sparked your initial interest to go into consulting?
I think the opportunity to utilize and learn more about corporate strategy. And that's not everyone gets that opportunity. I think marketing strategy comes a long way, but working with Fortune 100 companies around the world, you're talking about Coca-Cola, American Express, Foster Brewing, companies like that are very large, yet the problems are similar to what we studied in business school. But getting your arms around that, and then it's not just as simple as a couple of figures and you have the aha thing. It's the whole people side of things, right? Which no school, as great as it is, can really prepare you for. So that is a great opportunity to do that, particularly when you're younger and you're willing to spend 200 nights of a year, calendar year in a hotel room, which is what I ended up doing. And which is the reason why not too many people stay in that track for a long time.
Yeah, in fact, that was one of the draws for me is also the travel related to it. But you're right, after a while, it can get a little bit old and you want to have more of a routine and longevity in one place.
That's
So I'm
right.
curious, you worked with a lot of startups, you worked with a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm curious, what are the three things you often see that is a mistake many repeat over and over again?
Oh, yeah. And probably not specific only to startups, meaning we're all at all companies and levels equally apt to make these mistakes. I think not all growth is good. And it's so cliche, it seems like, oh, that should be obvious. But when generally growth we want to believe is good because we want to grow market share, we want to gain more customers, we want to grow revenues, right? But particularly when you set it in motion across a larger organization that's growing, it's more than 5 people, it's 500 people, it's 5,000 people. It is very hard to maintain that balance and really get and prioritize the right kind of growth. So I think that's a definite thing. Even though we're all about enabling growth, but we like to call it smart growth or efficient growth or frankly profitable growth. And that's a very large lesson that we see needs to be emphasized over and over again, unfortunately.
Well, this is interesting because you're in the heart of Silicon Valley,
Yeah,
and there a lot of companies are pushed for growth, 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 and without even a glance at profitability.
yeah,
So, and I think this is something a lot of entrepreneurs often do. I'm involved with the startup community here in Thailand, and they're often think that what we need to do is just raise money, keep growing, raising money, with not much of an emphasis on profitability.
yeah.
So I'm curious, how do you address something like that where people are seeing these great success stories of companies that have raised millions of dollars and are growing? But I think you're saying have smart growth and
Yeah.
actually have an eye on profitability.
Well, and I think this connects with growth, how you grow and the why, the strategy, in other words. What is it we're trying to do to compete? There's always competition. What is our durable competitive advantage, right? And if we're just growing for the sake of growing because we just want to be bigger and it's kind of uncontrolled or not aligned carefully or focused, I think therein lies a lot of danger. And what I mean by competitive strategy, I mean, uh, let's pick global consumer product brands, right? And is bigger always better? And of course, better, you have to define that carefully, both qualitatively and quantitatively. But at least from a financial point of view, bigger is not always better. It can be, but sometimes really good brands, highly focused, going after, say, the super premium market among the consumers that are more resilient and willing to pay a premium for certain aspects versus commodity products that are duking it out in, say, Costco or Walmart, not to beat up on them, right? Just because you're bigger doesn't mean you're a better company in terms of performance. And so those are the kinds of things and examples. You talk about case studies, trying to illustrate that with senior executives, entrepreneurs, and CEOs. They don't have the benefit of that perspective or that experience. They're just being told, or they think, I just got to grow, get more and grow more. But one of the first questions, I think is worth asking is, who is your ideal customer? How do you define it? Customer or client, product or service? I mean, really strip it down. What's the prototype if that segment exists? If you could clone that over and over again, what does that mean? And then, of course, you get to the other side, both of from a strategy and size of market. Well, are there three in the world? Or are there 300, right? Or 3 million? But I think it's a very useful exercise. It also, particularly for smaller companies where they have a founder still involved, I think it gets down to motivation of what is it they built that company for. Some really exciting ones, and maybe not the ones we read about in Silicon Valley that are in the tech area. I did this because I built a better mousetrap, really. I never thought I'd be leading a company of 2,000 people, but I started by just being better. I saw there's a big gap that the big companies weren't filling. I created this or this and this. And before you knew it, I had this. And usually they're very humble, like, oh my gosh, I still don't know what I'm doing, but I'm trying, right? But I've learned the hard way. And connecting that to, okay, well, if you could take a step back, what kind of companies still, if you're growing, what kind of growth will still enable where you want to grow, where you want to go as an entrepreneur, meaning why you started this company. So I don't know if that's making any sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because I work with a lot of startups, and they often, let's say, start off want to change the world. They have a product they want to change the world, but then they have to go into raising money. And
Right.
that's when the money guys come in. And money guys want their money quickly. And so
Yes.
they're going to focus on growth, 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 because if they show the growth, then within a short amount of time, they can actually exit and get more money and, get a round of exit for them as well. So what advice would you give to someone who starts out wanting to change the world, but then meets the money people who are emphasizing growth? What kind of balance should they have,
Yeah.
or how do you deal with those two opposing forces, really?
I'm so glad you brought that up because just last month I was dealing with a very experienced founder. She actually has a Harvard MBA, very impressive, has worked for large companies, small companies, now doing her own entrepreneurial thing. And she was also falling into that potential spiral. Oh, I got to raise capital because this and this and this. I said, well, hang on. You can do that. No approach is perfect. There are trade-offs. You need to understand upfront what the trade-offs are. If you take outside capital, whether from angels or VCs or some other, recognize that they're not necessarily going to be patient, right? You just referenced that. They need a return. They need an IRR on that and interest rates, right? All this, there's going to be pressure there, and that's who they are. You're swimming with the sharks. Also recognize, and this is a hard metaphor, it's easier, and I hate to bring this up, it's easier to get divorced from a bad relationship in life than it is to get rid of a bad business partner. When you are raising capital, particularly on the equity side, you effectively have a partner forever. If you think about that, does that make it make you more careful and more deliberate about what you're trying to do? Oh, just because that person said yes and wants to put in X million dollars into your company, which sounds wonderful and it's a huge effort to get there, by the way. What if that goes bad? And that's not that unusual.
In fact, when it comes to money and money people, it often goes bad, correct?
If you're, hey, I'm here to change the world, and like in the investor, and I feel sympathetic to the investors, like, yeah, but I can't be stuck here for 20 years with nothing to show for it. I'm not here for that. Right? Or they're under pressure from their investors, right? Which is really what goes on. So I think people really need to understand the quote partnership dynamic in business. I mean, the same is true in operating partners or business partners, but particularly true from the financial investment partnership side.
Do you have a recommendation on the three things to look for to make sure you have an ideal partnership?
I do think some visioning. I mean, this sounds strange from a CFO, right? I should be all about the numbers. But I think if you are in the stages of making these strategic moves in your company, why? Why are you doing what you're doing in your company? I do ask this question now that I think about it. I say, hey, whatever decisions we're making and we're working together 5 years from now, and I don't know you that well yet, 5 years from now, what's going to make you say that was a success? Meaning, how do you define success? Is it all about the financial return for you as an entrepreneur? Or is it like, I got into this because I was a biotech entrepreneur and I really wanted to cure these kinds of diseases or bring these treatments forward. And if that is really true to your motivation because you lost a relative who didn't get that right, which by the way, these are real stories, even if you did okay on the business side, but you didn't achieve that, how is that going to make you feel 7 years from now? And then to answer your question, well, what does that mean in terms of which venture capital or how I should think about investment capital? Well, are you aligned on that? What if they say, you know what, we don't want you to pursue the development of that drug because that's not profitable, it's not a big enough market, but that was your motivation. Is that okay with you? I'm not trying to bias you. Is that okay with you, though?
I often push entrepreneurs to really get to traction sooner than later.
Yeah.
Because I often tell them, and feel free to correct me, that if you really want to raise money, the easiest way to raise money is have traction.
Yeah.
But so many entrepreneurs don't push themselves to get to traction because they're part of it. I think people see this game, so to say, that they see in the news, right? XYZ company raised, billions of dollars. Now they're on this path, and now they're a unicorn.
Yeah.
It's so rare. And
Yeah.
whereas I think someone who actually goes for traction, which means actually, you got the product market fit, you actually matched up a pricing scheme that people are willing to pay, right?
Yep.
That doesn't mean you can't tweak it or pivot once you have traction. But once you have traction, you can actually raise smarter money, is my thinking. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, the most expensive money from an equity side that you raise is the earliest. And it's understandable, right? If you're the first investors in, you're going to need a lot to compensate for that risk. Beyond even that, even if capital wasn't concerned, but it's always a concern. I echo what you're saying because and in finance, we talk about the unit economics. And understanding that while you're small is so much more beneficial than even when you get a little bit bigger. So case in point, so many founders think, well, if I can just grow, then I'll get there. I'll be more profitable. I'll have more money, right? And they're just really playing a cash flow game without really understanding. If you are selling a product for X and it costs you Y to do it, or if you're delivering a service for X and it costs you Y, do you understand that? Even at a very simplified level. And it's hard, right? That's where finance and marketing and strategy and customer insights, right? I think the overlap, the Venn diagram of that is so crucial, right? And pick any company. It could be fast food, it could be consumer products, it could be tech SaaS, which we do a lot of, all of that, right? But those are still the same basic building blocks. And it gets harder as a company gets bigger and faster. So I am a big believer, if you can figure it out, as desperate as you feel you need to just grow early on, it will force not only insights, but some perhaps decisions or thoughts that you didn't have to when you started. And that might be a better way to build your company, right? Is what I'm proposing. But if you're just running like mad and not figuring it out, or vice versa, you're just not even getting it out there in the market to see what it is versus what's in your mind. And I've seen both extremes of that. And by the way, when I say these things, I hope they don't come across as, oh, these are very understandable human foibles that we all fall, myself included, right? So I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying this people are bad for doing. I'm just saying this is what I observe in human behavior and business.
Well, that's one of the other true axioms in life. Anything worthwhile is not easy, right? But I think it's an interesting discussion because I often see entrepreneurs, they often don't realize it, but they're actually faced with a crossroads at some point. And they see this about growth, raise money, grow, get people, have a burn rate, and then eventually we'll get to a model that works. And I think that comes at the expense of two critical things. One, really honing in on your business model of how you're actually going to make money, right? It's not that you can always figure it out later. It's just going to be advertising. And then the other is really in terms of getting to product market fit. And the two go hand in hand. I think this is what you're talking about. There's an overlap of marketing strategy, finance strategy. But a lot of times people just go with the financing and they don't even realize they're actually on the path of just growth But at some point, profitability is going to come into play. And that's going to be based on the business model you've implemented to actually get to that level of profitability and or revenue.
Right.
Do you see this dilemma as well for a lot of entrepreneurs?
Oh, absolutely. And you see it, by the way, it's not just in entrepreneurs. Look at the large tech firms. And I'll pick on Google, Facebook, or Meta, right? And Amazon. And during the surge in the pandemic, by the way, not a coincidence that interest rates are close to 0%, historically low. The taps are turned on, digital, anything was on fire in a positive way. They thought they could grow at 30% a year or more almost forever. And they made capacity strategic decisions, particularly with respect to headcount as well as footprint, that assumed that that straight line of growth would be there for till the horizon. And now look what's happened in the last 18, 24 months. And of course, it's gone 180. And now they're saying, oh, we're about efficiency. Now, NASA's become a very trendy word, right? The seesaw, this and that. And you see this cascading down into all levels of startups, of course. And the VC taps have dried up for a variety of macro reasons as well. These are cycles. These are business cycles. They're more extreme, particularly in the tech world and particularly in entrepreneurship. You go back at the data, at the macro level, cycles are always there. The first internet bubble, right? And the lead up to that. I'm not saying we're in a bubble, mind you, right? But these swings will occur. My point is, right, going from one extreme to another, if you're a large company with $100 billion in cash built up through profitability through years, you can do that. How many of those changes in direction can you do when you're a smaller company, right? To your point. And so just because the other guy is going crazy on growth at that time, or that's what you're hearing, it may not be the right strategy for you. And also, just because the headlines say this unicorn, that, and that. By the way, there are so many unicorns that are now gone, not in a good way. I was shocked. I wasn't following 23andMe, and now they're about to be delisted from NASDAQ. I'm like, oh my gosh. Sounds pretty desperate there. I don't have an opinion on that, except like I'm shocked by it. It's hard
to imagine how a business model like that or a business like that can really go under, right?
Yeah. But just because they had that heady valuation at one point, or a company X, what WeWork, or et cetera, there are also plenty of companies that people don't realize never took $1 of venture capital money. So a couple of years ago, MailChimp was acquired by Intuit for some astronomical figure, and they never took an outside dollar, is my understanding. Oh my goodness. And they're in a very competitive area. Talk about marketing tech, right? How many email platform competitors are there?
So this leads me to a formula we've often talked about, and that is finance plus strategy plus customer insights equals better outcomes. Tell me more about this formula and why it's important.
I think it speaks to how siloed we are in different functions and different data. And connecting those is not, it sounds so intuitive, we should be doing that, but often isn't, even in a small company. So for example, start as a marketing person, right? We're just really, really driven to keep growing, get more customers. It's about market share. I mean, it's an incredibly intense battle, right? And you're up against it. Pick an industry. If you're in beverages, it's like you versus the other person. And it's an all-out war, right? It's very intense. Or financial services, or software, or SaaS, right? And that is hard enough. And just even understanding all the different segments, usually you don't even understand the segments, right? You're in this war, sorry if I'm meandering. Then connecting, the finance people are like, things aren't going well. We should be focusing more on our margins and profitability. Well, this is what the numbers, and that's hard enough for them to figure all that out, get their arms around that. And they're like, ooh, our margins are not going in the right direction. And this, oh my God, we have a cash flow problem. And, people are asking like, how is this business unit doing versus that business? I'm like, we don't know because we can't, we're making guesses at it. We're not set up for that. And then, driving that and connecting to the poor customer. What does the customer want? What is the customer willing to do? What are their choices? How are they going to behave with us versus the competitors and the overall market and all of that? that again, that Venn diagram of creating, okay, here's some financial insights. It looks like this market segment or this customer segment has 3 times much more margin when all is said and done versus that one. By the way, that doesn't just pop out of the financials. You really have to understand, like, okay, wait a second. For us to deliver the service that that customer segment wants, we have this whole back end, whether it's fulfillment, whether it's post-sale support, whether it's delivery, right? All of that, we got to figure out that portion across all of our different segments. And what we'll find is often the 80-20 rule, maybe 90-10 rule in some extreme cases. 20% of your customers generate 80% of your profits. 20% of your product segments or client segments generate 80% of your profits. But there's no easy way for you to see that. And getting down into that level so that you connect the financial side, the marketing insights, the customer insights, all of that together. Oh my goodness, now you have a way of saying, you know what? Instead of us trying to spend all this money across all of these customer segments or product segments equally the same, maybe I should prioritize those 10 to 20% that we just identified. But because they have lower volume often, if we have a large customer segment or product segment, that's 40% of the volume of the company, which often happens. Well, that's where all of management is spending our time putting out fires. Even though I can tell you case after case like that, a lot of times I see that breaking even or losing money.
So if you were to advise a startup, an entrepreneur, what are the 3 things you would tell them that they really need to think about in terms of making sure they're going to be on the path to success?
I think not all growth is good, getting back to that, right? Understanding the unit economics, meaning just making the sale or selling a service, you need to understand what goes into that and including the full life cycle costs of that. And then you have scarce resources. This is one thing that business school in the corporate finance classes, the theory is very elegant, but the real world is different. The theory is very elegant in corporate finance that if you can demonstrate that anything is going to generate a good ROI, RR, or some positive thing, it should be financeable. There's unlimited infinite capital. I mean, that's really the theory. Markets are efficient, et cetera, et cetera. Well, anyone who went through 2008, 2009 would probably disagree with that. So the point of that is, particularly in a smaller company, but also large companies. I was just reading about the turnaround in progress at GE. GE, my goodness, who ever thought that they were close to blowing up in smoke? Such a proud company, right? So these things happen, and they have to make resource-driven, prioritize relentlessly what you're going to do in order to achieve results. When you are an entrepreneur going from 0 to 1, you have, by definition, such limited resources. You have got to figure out, I can't grow everywhere. I can't compete everywhere. I got to find that product market fit that you talk about as quickly as possible and take it from there, and I still haven't figured it out.
I often talk to teams and I ask them, they want to raise money. I say, great. So I ask them, what's plan B if you raise no money? And they're often looking at me like deer in the headlights, like, what do you mean? This is not an option, right? I said, no, that should be an option. In fact, that should be your first option, right? And raising money should be your second option. But I think often people think raising money is really the battle. And that once you raise money, that then you're on the street to successes. And I think as you talked about, there's good money and there's bad money. And sometimes actually raising money is the beginning of all kinds of problems as opposed to solutions. So I really encourage them, figure out a way that you're actually going to make money. Find the shortest distance between where you are and actually making money, getting some traction. And, that's not often easy, right? But that often pushes them to be more creative, be more scrappy. And that forces you to actually think about the units. You're talking about the economic units, right? And what actually is going into it in terms of your capital expenditure and your operational expenditures, which you really need to think about. That's what's going to cause you to pivot. And at the same time, we're talking about marketing, emphasize getting closer to the customer and find out what they're willing to pay for. And I have found that if you can do one of 3 things, your chance of being successful are pretty good. And if you can do all 3 of these things, then I'd say you have a 3x chance of being successful. And those 3 things are, if you can save people time, money, or make it easier. It's as simple as that. Your chance of being successful are pretty good. If you can do all three, I'd say it's a 3x chance of being successful. But then there is this other variable that can change it to 6x, 10x, 12x. And that's, can you evoke an emotion? If you can evoke an emotion, then you can expedite quite a bit. A perfect example is what Steve Jobs did with the iPod. By no means was it the first MP3 player or CD player or a way to carry music in a portable manner. But he was in a position to recognize that the hard drive prices were coming down. You could store more on them, and it could be in a more mobile capacity. So he came up with the brilliant thing, you know, you can take 1,000 songs in your pocket. I remember that moment. I'm thinking, are you kidding me? You mean I don't have to go through all my CDs and pick the 5 I want for this trip, and that's all I'm limited to, and I can actually have more capacity than my total collection, right? But the emotional factor that was introduced was that flywheel, and that was just cool, right? I mean, there's no way you could see that and you say, "Wow, that's cool," and that's what we're talking about. I mean, because he did make it easier, make it cheaper, and saved you time with an MP3 player called an iPod that fits in your pocket. But then that flywheel is that emotion thing. I mean, it doesn't even exist now, right? But the fact that you could go through the entire 1,000 songs, the one spin of your thumb, that was pretty cool.
Well, and on that point, behind the scenes, credit to Jobs for the vision and the negotiating tenacity to get the studios, to where the labels, the musicians to be part of the ecosystem so that you ultimately can just through the flywheel get 1,000 of those people, because that was not possible before then, right? And to do that in a cost-effective way, which I think a lot of people in the music industry to this day still probably despise Steve Jobs because it destroyed their economics, but so be it. He had that vision, and here we are now in the land of digital music.
Well, that actually wasn't just him, it was also Spotify, right? I mean, it's all these things that basically changed the whole landscape of how music is sold and the rights and everything. But in ways, it was going to happen, right? I mean, it's either that or what people were doing, which is basically pirating the music. But in terms of portability it did solve those three things, right? In terms of speed, money, and ease of use. But that emotional element, that's where you have your super X factor.
Yeah. And I think that gets into the strength of really good marketing, right? When you really get, the word brand is way overused and little understood. And the companies that really understand it, I think that emotional depth, which is hard to measure, is absolutely crucial to have any kind of brand that makes sense, that has that kind of ability and power.
Well, the interesting thing is, a lot of times your marketing is much easier the closer you get to the customer and actually get to that underlying insight. That's the kernel of truth that's driving things.
Right.
Because if you can get to that, then your marketing's a lot easier.
Right.
And up until then, you're going to be guessing in the dark, and maybe you'll get it right, maybe you won't. But it's a lot easier after you go deeper and try to understand what is actually motivating these customers and what problem are you really solving, right?
Right. Right. And that takes a lot more analysis, insight, and really going deeper.
It does, but it requires one thing more than anything, just raw curiosity. Like a lot of times in market research, people will say it's market research, it's, ivory tower, that kind of stuff. But in reality, what is market research? It's structured curiosity.
You know the great story about IBM when they first created the computer and they issued did this huge global market research study, which was very expensive. You know what they came back with, what the market demand was going to be for the computer?
What?
3. No, really, it was 3 units. Because when they were asking like, and the way they're describing it, right, and being very literal about what this monstrosity thing is, and with punch cards or whatever, how are people going to respond, particularly companies? I don't need that. How is that in the world? Why would I spend, millions of dollars for that? So yeah, the global demand for computers was laid out as 3. Sony
Well, you know,
Walkman.
it's interesting because I think that also led to another critical decision they had made, which is when they contracted Microsoft
Oh
for
gosh, yes.
software, right?
Yeah. We studied that. And I remember in business school, actually in our strategy class, it was at the time co-taught by the great CEO of Intel, Andy Grove. And so yeah, that was it was great to hear in first person as well as analyze all of these decisions as Silicon Valley was still in ascent with those huge players.
Well, maybe you can share that story a little bit because not maybe everyone may not know about it. Since you actually got it from Andy Grove, maybe you can give us a little synopsis of that whole story.
Well, I mean, so many different things. I mean, first, Intel itself, which is now going through some strategic difficulties, obviously, many CEOs later, but Andy Grove was part of that original generation. And everyone assumed that Wintel, right, was just the dominant duopoly. But before that, and I'm not a semiconductor engineer, obviously, it wasn't an obvious thing that Intel got to that position in microprocessors because they bet the company early on. They started off, in a much more commoditized segment of semiconductors, and global competition being what it was, they were getting crushed, particularly by the Japanese semiconductor companies. This is way back again, and I think in the 70s, possibly early 80s. And at the time, computer industry is not anywhere what we're talking about now. But they bet the company and pivoted, to use that word, or change strategy, and it was not easy to go all in on microprocessors, to get out of a commoditized industry, no matter how big it is, because that was where the volume was, to go into this burgeoning industry around microprocessors. It's an incredible strategic move, and it wasn't done just out of whim or instinct, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, an example of someone not doing that, let's say, is Kodak, right?
Right.
I mean, what business was really Kodak in? You know, was it in the business of selling film, chemicals, paper? Yeah, one could argue that was their business. You know, that was their
Yeah.
bread and butter. But the real business was really selling memories.
You're like talking like Mad Men episode. Yeah. Taylor. That was a great episode. Yeah.
It was. That was a really good
The
episode.
carousel.
The
Yeah.
carousel. Yeah, anybody wants to see it, just look up the carousel Mad Men on YouTube and you'll see it. But it's true. In fact, Kodak invented digital cameras,
Yeah.
right? Internally,
And thousands of other patents too.
right. And
Kodak and
the board
Xerox.
basically said, "Oh, no one's going to want to watch their pictures on a screen."
Right. Right. And back to your
But
point, lack of curiosity or creativity to not see that, to not even imagine that is really brutal.
well, I can see what happened. I mean, they had, you know, their cash cow
Yep.
was, hey, are we going to threaten our own cash cow? And I would argue, yeah, you should, because you're in a better position to control that than having somebody else do it.
Yeah.
Because whether you do it or somebody else does it, it's going to happen if you just look at, you know, again, people are going to want it easier, faster, and cheaper, right? And
That's right.
digital is definitely going to go that way. It certainly saves you a lot of time. You don't have to deal with the paper, going to the store, dropping off your film, waiting, you know, days or whatever, you know. So absolutely. But sometimes, I mean, I often say it's better to be your worst competitor than to kind of constantly look at what your competition's doing, because you're always replicating and follow them. You're going to end up being always the follower, never the leader.
Well, Andy Grove was very tough. He was recognized as CEO of the year multiple times, et cetera. He had a saying, two things that stick with me. One, it's kind of catchy, I suppose, says only the paranoid survive. And reflecting in terms of corporate strategy and leaders, that was very reflected how driven he was and to not take things for granted, even when they're on top. The other one I think is a very subtle thing. I haven't shared this with too many people. Well, it's out there. He talked about strategic inflection points. I believe he was really the first to coin that, and it's really about referencing. And he was a scientist at his core. The change of slope in a curve and the inflection point, right? That mathematical concept when the slope has changed. And I think it's more powerful than just the image when it's approaching neutral versus growth like that. It could still go up or it could start heading down. And these inflection points in business are brutal. You're Kodak, you're getting some sense that this digital thing is beginning to take off, but you have this dominant business, incredibly profitable, tied to film. What do you do? Absolutely, I can understand that. My goodness, not so long ago, there was this thing called BlackBerry. And more than an emotional connection, I think people were addicted, right? I think, I think they should have been going to rehab, right? Where are they? What happened?
In fact, there was a big rivalry for a while, right? Now I like my keypad. I'm not going to do the touch tone,
Yep.
the screen thing.
Yeah.
Look what happened, right?
So particularly in technology, obsolescence risk is real. All of these things, all of hyper competition, everything is constantly going hard. And just because there's some dominance at the top, that doesn't mean it will be. Odds are it won't be in 10 years.
Well, for me, it's actually more basic than that, right? And that is once you realize that you control nothing in this world,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you really, I've learned the extent of control I have in this entire world is me half the time. Because even I can't control myself 100% of the time.
That's right.
Right? So translate that to business, and that is that you can't control your competition, but you can control what you do.
Yeah.
And what you can do is actually become your biggest competitor, because then you actually control a bit of where the transition is from where your current business to where things are headed anyways.
And I will even put a caveat or footnote to that statement. I hope we all draw lessons from the pandemic that particularly in business, we don't control nearly the amount of stuff or the amount of things that we can control is not nearly what we thought it was, right? And look, we pride ourselves, I pride myself particularly on our strategic planning capability, financial planning and modeling. No one had this. No one had this, on their bingo card for 2020, right? I don't care if you were a Fortune 100 company or a small company. And reflecting what was going through this, I remember talking to a very good CEO of an impressive company. And we were going through all these different things. And he's like, okay, I think we should do this. Oh my gosh, I don't know about this. And this executive over here is thinking this. And I said, look, I think we need to take a step back and say whatever decisions and analysis we're doing is going to be wrong. It is absolutely going to be wrong. We still have to do it. But if we have some humility to the limits of understanding, because no one's been through this, at least not in 100 years. So if we understand that whatever we're doing is likely to be wrong, how does that affect our decision-making framework? And let's not pretend that we have this great playbook that we understand where we're going to be in 12 months, 24 months, 36 months. So having the flexibility to say, hey, we took a couple steps that way. Uh-oh, there's something else going on. We had no idea, right? I mean, this is what the pandemic was and still is in some lingering way, right? I think that was very needed humility for all of us. Man, my spreadsheet wasn't right on that one, and my brilliant background on this, we didn't know that, and boy, we set in motion to do this because we thought we could control, right, all the decisions, the effectiveness of that, and that was very difficult and still is, I think.
But the beauty of the pandemic also is it created tremendous opportunities
Yeah.
that did not exist before and would not exist even now if it wasn't for the pandemic. For example,
Yeah.
the shift to online behavior and comfortability of doing things online shifted tremendously.
Oh, yes.
And it's opened up the gateways to doing much more scalability in things and services and products at an online level that was unprecedented before that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the shift, I think that is the right word. And it's not going back, and think
No,
about things that were,
the cat is out of the bag.
think about you and I in different hemispheres having this conversation
Right.
very comfortably that X number of years ago would have been very difficult to have.
Actually, it wouldn't have. The technology existed, right? It's not like the technology didn't exist,
Right.
right? I mean, video conferencing, all that existed. But that was a massive shift where people had no choice and they just become comfortable with it. In fact, for many, it's become more preferred now.
That's right. Again, we're going off topic. I think the whole debate over return to work, remote work, and all this. I think businesses are the ones that are fighting it and mandating returns to the office for certain categories. I think they're missing a great opportunity, and they're living in a digital in a dinosaur world, really.
Actually, I don't think we're going off topic because what we're really talking about are these aha moments that present themselves, right? And sometimes they're aha moments that you have on your own, but these are aha moments that are given to you by the external world. And like almost anything, the pandemic had some definite downsides, but it also had some very unique opportunities. And in many cases, it ushered in the acceptance of new technology in bigger companies than it would have any other time, right? And it's also changed the dynamics of, as you're talking about, remote working, all these things that in the end are going to lead to some positive and some negative, but in the end, the changes happen. And now to fight it is going to cause more problems. But to recognize and take a part of the change and take out, maybe to cherry pick the things that you can really take advantage of and from the positive aspects, and recognize the negative and minimize them. But trust me, there's going to be another aha moment that's going to happen that's going to create other new opportunities as well as new challenges.
And I think if I reflect on it, what we see is a seismic shift, and you can't go back fully as much as some leaders want to. And the resistance to certain middle management, particularly in senior management, they have to learn new management skills, really, with this kind of distributed remote thing. And the ones that embrace it as an opportunity and realize that they may have to change how they operate at a skill level, at a personality level, they're the ones likely to adapt. And the ones that's, I'll be honest, I think a lot of management is having a problem because if they can't see the people in the office, they don't trust that the work is being done, which is really crazy given how digital all our work is, it seems like. So it's not like you're running a factory floor and like, where's everyone? And yet that's really, I feel, at the core, right? So those kinds of leadership challenges and management development challenges, I think, are at the crux of this. Um, and perhaps we've been blessed if you've been in management consulting as I, and you were talking about the travel involved, and this is even before we had the connectivity that we do now. You were not in the same city with your team. I know I wasn't for months on end. And you still had to perform at a very high level together.
Actually, I appreciate all these changes because I've been doing remote since 88. I mean, those are the days where I had dial up and I had to go to different countries and figure out, what's the most cost effective way to get dial up and be inexpensive. I used to do these dial back services, call back. And I mean, it was a mess. Now it's so much easier.
I remember I was working for this glamorous strategy consulting firm. I was in Australia. I guess I was based in Melbourne, but I lived in Sydney, and I was on this incredible assignment with this huge company in Europe. And I get a call from the office manager, very apologetically, as if I would be angry, say, "Hey, do you mind if we move your office here from this part to over here?" And I was like, "I have an office?" Like, she's like, "Yeah, you have an office." Whoa, I didn't know that. I've been on the go. So I mean, I was like, oh, I don't care. I've been moved. What stuff do I have there? I don't know. So yeah, I hear you. I think there's some antiquated thinking that we need to evolve from, and it will be in a better place for that.
Yeah, well, like everything, it's going to be positive and negative. So, but let me ask you, Arnold. So, what's next for you? What's an area you'd like to look more into, and that you think is going to really be an area of interest for you, and how things are going to evolve for the kind of consulting you're doing?
Well, I hinted at this. I and everyone at our firm, we really enjoy doing the pure business aspects, but I think the double win, you talked about kind of the 2x for it. I think it's when we help people achieve their business and entrepreneurial dreams, which often aren't purely monetary, right? They're in it for a reason. They're delivering a service that is needed. They're delivering, creating a product or something, right, that is needed. They have some inner motivation on that. So continuing to enable that, and this sounds like I'm spinning something here. I should have said, and I'm a child of immigrants who are entrepreneurs at different levels, and very much the American immigrant story, right? Kind of literally grew up around it in the kitchen table. Nothing glamorous about it. Not a story book Hollywood type of thing. It's not what I'm suggesting. But to realize that people who are doing that, and these aren't necessarily the headline companies that we sometimes read about, particularly here in the San Francisco Bay Area. I mean, it's incredibly gratifying to be a part of that story. And if we're bringing in that skill set and we can drive those insights and share some learnings or connect those dots in those silos, that's really what gets us very excited. So that's what we're looking forward to.
So let me ask you, if you could have lunch or dinner with anyone in the world of finance, marketing, strategy, who would it be and why? Want to give me more than one?
Well, I'm pausing just because I'm hoping that we also become more enlightened as a business community and business leaders. That it's not just about how many zeros you can accumulate in your bank account. And I'm curious about those business leaders who have that holistic view. I'm not, that sounds really crazy for someone in my background. Let me give you an example. I don't know this person. I've heard this person speak a couple of times here in Silicon Valley in small gatherings. Netflix, I felt, was under the headline radar for a very long time, which sounds strange given how dominant they are, right? But their founder, Reed Hastings, who I guess is still on their board, has also done tremendous things outside of the company, which I find really, really heartening. And in hearing him talk, I remember he gave this story. Am I allowed to tell stories other people tell? I remember he was winning some big, prestigious award from Stanford Business School. And for some reason, there weren't too many people in the audience, might have been weather or something. And he told about not the successes, not, he's not building a rocket ship to go to Mars or whatever. He told about his first failures. I always felt that that was incredibly powerful to be that humble and to be that honest. He talked about working his butt off at a software company, again, pre-internet. I forget what it was, but somewhere in Silicon Valley, and he was getting into the office at 5 a.m, not leaving till after midnight. And the story goes that on his cubicle, he was drinking coffee like crazy. And yet somehow he never ran out of clean coffee mugs. We all know that feeling, I think. And he just assumed someone in custodial staff cleaned them, even though he didn't ask him. And then one day it was the CEO and founder of the company washing his mugs. And he was, just whatever, a lowly developer or something. And he was just flabbergasted. And he said, well, the CEO said, you are working so hard. And I feel so bad that I cannot do more, but the least I can do is make your life a little bit easier by doing this. I mean, this is a story he was telling decades later when he's at the top of the world. And he was also very honest, and we worked our butts off. And I think we sold like 24 of these CD-ROMs, when they had hopes for selling thousands, if not millions of these things, because that's how they shipped software back then. So that's a very powerful story.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that even motivated him further to work harder, right?
Yeah, he said, "Oh my God, I would walk on broken glass and hot coals for that guy, of course,
Right.
because he wasn't doing it for show. This is what was going on. It was like a little
And the
elf
beauty
guy.
part of it is the CEO didn't highlight that he was doing it. He just happened
No,
to get caught one day,
yeah,
doing it, and that has even more power, right?
it's really genuine, right?
Yeah.
So those I think those are. I hope we do have more of that in business, even when things are getting tougher and people are running even harder.
Well, I think that's a great story. I loved it, and I appreciate you sharing that with me.
I hope it doesn't
Uh,
get me into trouble with somebody at Netflix.
I don't think it will. I think you're okay. If anything, it may lead to more supply of very clean coffee mugs.
Oh boy, that could be dangerous.
Well, thanks a lot, Arnold. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for listening to my ramblings, and I really appreciated our discussion.
Thanks.
Take care.
Getting to AHA was brought to you by iResearch. To find out more about us, head to iResearch.com and make sure to search for Getting to AHA in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else podcasts are found. And don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. Thank you for listening.